I didn't know someone was living in my walls. That sentence still sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud, like something designed to go viral, like a headline you scroll past and forget. But there are certain memories that don't fade with time. They sharpen. They come back with details you didn't even realize your brain recorded. The exact rhythm of a drip in the kitchen sink at 2:41 a.m., the way the hallway light flickered when the refrigerator compressor kicked on, the faint smell of damp plaster that always seemed stronger after rain. For 3 months I blamed the building, the pipes, the neighbors, my own insomnia. For 3 months I lived with the wrong kind of company, and didn't even know it. It started as a normal move, the kind that's supposed to feel like a new chapter. I'd taken a job across town, not glamorous, but stable. The apartment was older, brick building, 4 floors, narrow stairwell that carried every footstep like a rumor. The listing called it charming. It had tall windows, hardwood floors with a warm sheen, and those heavy baseboards that make you think the place has survived 100 winters. There were small flaws. A bedroom closet that didn't sit right in its frame, a faint crack in the wall near the bathroom, and a ceiling vent in the hallway that hummed when the heat ran. None of it felt strange. Old buildings talk. That's what I told myself. The first week I slept like I'd been underwater for years and finally surfaced. New routine, new commute, new neighbors. The guy across the hall, thin, nervous energy, always checking his mailbox like it owed him money, nodded at me once and then avoided eye contact forever after. The woman downstairs smoked on her fire escape every night, her cigarette glow bobbing in the darkness like a lighthouse. Somewhere on my floor, a dog barked in short bursts, like it was warning someone it couldn't see. Typical apartment life. Then the noises began. Not loud. Not the kind that make you sit up with your heart in your throat. Small things that your mind files under normal. A faint scrape in the wall behind the bed, as if a piece of furniture was being dragged in the unit next door. A soft thud above the kitchen cabinets, like something settling. Once, at maybe 1:30 a.m., I woke to a sound that reminded me of someone pressing a palm flat to drywall and sliding it slowly, the way you do when you're trying to feel for a stud. I lay still, listened, and waited for a second sound that never came. The building cooled and expanded. Pipes clicked. I rolled over and told myself to stop being dramatic. But the next day, the smell arrived. I noticed it when I stepped into the hallway to take out trash. A stale, sour odor that hung in the air, like wet cardboard. I assumed someone had left garbage in the chute. It wasn't my problem until I came home that night and caught the same smell inside my apartment, faint but distinct, under the cleaner scent of laundry detergent and dish soap. I walked through each room, sniffing like an idiot, and it seemed strongest near the bedroom closet. When I opened the closet door, the smell didn't rush out. It just waited there, like it had nowhere else to go. I cleaned. I cleaned like you do when you're anxious, and you don't have a name for it. I scrubbed the bathroom grout until my hands hurt. I wiped the baseboards, vacuumed the vents, checked under the sink for leaks. Everything looked fine. The smell faded for 2 days. Then it came back, stronger after a thunderstorm, as if the rain had awakened something inside the walls. By week 3, I started noticing tiny inconsistencies. A jar of peanut butter in my pantry that I didn't remember opening. My kitchen sponge damp when I was certain it had been dry. Once I found the bathroom mirror slightly fogged, as if someone had taken a hot shower recently, even though I'd been at work all day and the bathroom window had been closed. I stared at that fog for a long time, and my brain tried to solve it with the simplest explanation: humidity, a vent problem, a pipe, anything other than what my gut whispered, quiet and ridiculous. You're not alone. I bought a cheap indoor security camera online, one of those little cubes you can plug into any outlet. I didn't tell myself it was because I thought someone was in the apartment. I told myself it was because I wanted to monitor the front door in case of package theft. That sounded reasonable, adult, normal. I placed it on a shelf in the living room, aimed at the entryway and the kitchen. When it blinked its tiny blue light, I felt absurdly safer, as if technology could shame fear into leaving. The first footage was boring. Me coming and going, carrying groceries, dropping keys in the bowl by the door. A delivery guy, a maintenance worker once, entering with my permission to fix a stubborn window latch. Nothing else. For 4 nights I slept without listening for the walls to speak. Then, on the 5th night, the camera caught something that made my stomach twist. At 3:17 a.m., the living room light changed. Not turned on, just changed, as if something passed close to the lens and shifted the exposure. The audio recorded a sound, a faint pop, like tape being peeled from something. Then silence. That was it. No figure, no footsteps, no obvious movement. If I'd been rational, I would have shrugged and blamed a glitch. But something about the timing, 3:17 exactly, felt too clean, too intentional, like a signature. The next morning I tested the camera by waving my hand in front of it and watching the exposure adjust. It looked the same. I checked for drafts that might flutter a curtain. The windows were still. I checked the timestamp settings. They were correct. That day at work, I couldn't focus. Every time I heard the air conditioning click on, I thought of the pop in the audio. When someone in the office dragged a chair, my skin prickled. I began to feel like my apartment wasn't just a place I lived. It was a place that watched me back. That night I went home and stood in the center of the living room and listened. I turned off the TV, shut down my laptop, silenced my phone. The apartment became a shell. In the quiet, I could hear the building breathing, far-off traffic, the occasional flush from another unit, the faint buzz of the hallway light outside my door. Then, from somewhere behind the bedroom wall, a soft shifting, like fabric, moving across wood. I walked to the bedroom and placed my ear against the wall. The sound stopped instantly. I stepped back, waited. Nothing. I pressed my palm flat on the drywall. It was cool, slightly damp near the baseboard, like the wall held moisture. I scanned the corner where the crack had been since the day I moved in. I hadn't thought much of it. Now it looked different. Wider, maybe, or maybe I was just seeing it with new eyes. The crack ran vertical, almost hidden in the shadow of the closet frame. I opened the closet again. The smell hit me immediately this time, not like air rushing out, but like something close to my face. Sour, stale, human. I gagged and covered my mouth. Then I noticed something else. The closet floor, near the back wall, looked scuffed, as if something heavy had been dragged over it. A line of dust had been disturbed. My heart started to beat too loud, too close. I took everything out of the closet. Jackets, shoes, storage bins. I pulled the hanging rod off its brackets. I turned on every light in the bedroom until it felt like noon. Then I knelt and examined the back wall of the closet. There, partially hidden behind a strip of paint that didn't match, was a seam. It wasn't a crack. It wasn't normal drywall. It looked like an outline where someone had cut a rectangle and patched it back in. The edges were slightly raised, the paint uneven. In the top corner of the seam, a small area had been pressed inward, like a thumbprint. My first thought wasn't secret door. My first thought was maintenance access. Maybe there was an old pipe cleanout behind it, or an electrical junction. My second thought was darker. Why patch it? Why not a normal access panel? Why hide it inside a closet? I did the thing you're never supposed to do in horror stories. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from my toolbox and pressed it against the seam. The screwdriver slipped in with almost no resistance. My hands went cold. I stood up, stepping back like the wall might bite. I stared at the seam. I tried to laugh at myself, but nothing came out. I called the building manager, straight to voicemail. I left a message that sounded calmer than I felt. Something like, "Hey, there's a weird patch in the closet wall, might be moisture damage, can someone check it?" I didn't mention the smell. I didn't mention the noises. I didn't mention 3:17 a.m. I didn't mention how my instincts were screaming. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the lights on, the camera angled toward the hallway and the bedroom door. I tried to distract myself with a movie, but I kept pausing it every time the building made a sound. Around 2:50 a.m., I heard something that made every muscle in my body lock. A slow, careful scratch from inside the bedroom wall, like fingernails searching for a grip. I didn't move. I held my breath. I stared at the closed bedroom door. The scratch stopped. Then, very faintly, I heard a whisper of movement. Not inside my bedroom, but above it, in the space between the ceiling and the floor above. It sounded like someone crawling. My mind sprinted through explanations. Rats, raccoons, squirrels, anything. But the movement had a pattern. It paused, started, paused again, as if whoever or whatever was moving was listening too, making sure it wasn't heard. At 3:17 a.m., the camera's blue light blinked. I didn't look away from the bedroom door, but I heard the audio pick up a faint sound, almost too quiet. A breath. Not mine. A slow inhale. A slow exhale. Close to the camera. The living room door to the hallway was locked. The chain was on. There was nowhere for someone to be standing in front of the camera without walking through my field of view. Unless they were already inside. I didn't check the footage right then. I couldn't. I sat rigid until sunrise, when the apartment filled with that gray-blue morning light that makes everything look less threatening. I told myself I was going to leave. I told myself I was going to a hotel. I told myself 100 things. But instead I did the most human thing. I tried to prove I was wrong. At 8:11 a.m., I rewound the camera footage. At 3:16:52, the living room was empty. At 3:16:59, the exposure shifted as if something moved close to the lens. At 3:17:04, there was the pop. At 3:17:06, a faint shadow crossed the lower corner of the frame. Too low to be a person walking upright, more like someone crouched. The shadow moved toward the kitchen, out of frame. The audio caught breathing, slow, controlled, like someone trying not to make noise. And then, at 3:18:21, the shadow returned. This time, it rose slightly, and for a fraction of a second the camera caught something that didn't look like a trick of light. The outline of a head, close to the lens, then gone. No face, no clear features, just a shape, and the certainty that something living had been in my apartment while I sat frozen a room away. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped my phone. I replayed it again and again, hoping that repetition would turn it into something explainable. It didn't. I called the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and completely unprepared for what I said. I tried to keep it simple. I think someone is in my apartment. I have footage of movement at night. I found a hidden seam in my closet wall. The dispatcher asked if the person was currently inside. I looked at the closet door and felt my throat tighten. I didn't know. I said I wasn't sure. She told me to leave immediately and wait outside. I grabbed my keys and phone. I didn't take a jacket. I didn't turn off lights. I didn't even lock the door behind me properly because my fingers couldn't coordinate. I walked down the narrow stairwell too fast, expecting a hand to reach from behind and stop me. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I stood on the sidewalk and stared up at my windows like they belonged to someone else. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. They asked to see the footage, and I showed them on my phone, the tiny screen displaying the shifting exposure and the crouched shadow. One of them frowned in that way that says, "I've seen enough weirdness to stop being surprised, but not enough to stop being cautious." They entered the building with me behind them, their presence turning the hallway from a threat into something manageable. Inside my apartment, everything looked normal. The officers checked the bathroom, the bedroom, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. They opened cabinets. They checked the balcony door. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing I noticed instantly. The closet door was slightly open. I had closed it. I was sure I had closed it. But it sat there now with a narrow black gap, like an eye half-lidded. I pointed. The officers exchanged a look and approached. One of them pulled the door open slowly. The smell hit us immediately. Even the officer flinched. He muttered something under his breath, then stepped inside, shining his flashlight at the back wall. "There's a patch," he said, voice flat. I nodded. "That's what I—" The officer pressed on the seam with a gloved hand. The drywall flexed inward. He looked at his partner. His partner stepped closer, hand on his radio. There was a pause where nobody breathed. Then the officer hooked his fingers into the seam and pulled. The patch came away like it had been put there in a hurry. Drywall dust drifted down. Behind it was darkness. Not the normal darkness of a wall cavity, but a deeper void, like an actual space. The officer leaned his flashlight into the opening. The beam cut into the black and revealed something that made my skin crawl. Insulation pulled aside, wooden studs exposed, and beyond them, a narrow passage, a crawl space. Not big enough to stand, but big enough to move through. The officer's face changed. It wasn't disbelief. It was recognition, like he'd found the missing piece of a puzzle he didn't want to finish. He told me to step back into the bedroom and wait. His partner called for backup. I stood in the doorway as the officer squeezed through the opening, flashlight sweeping. The beam caught glints of something metallic. It caught a scrap of fabric. Then it caught a wall on the other side, brick, damp, stained. The space didn't belong to my unit. It wasn't part of any normal floor plan. It was a leftover artery in the building, a forgotten corridor between apartments, widened by time and neglect, and someone had turned it into a home. The officer's flashlight revealed a nest of blankets and clothes piled into a low mound. Plastic water bottles, crumpled food wrappers, a phone charger plugged into an extension cord that disappeared into the darkness, a small, portable lantern, and, lined up against the brick-like trophies, several items that made my stomach drop. My missing spare key, a pair of my socks I hadn't seen in weeks, and a hairbrush I'd assumed I'd lost during the move. The officer backed out, eyes scanning the room like he expected someone to rush him. He shook his head once, sharp and controlled. "There's someone living back there," he said. Or there was. I felt something in my chest collapse. Not relief, but a deeper kind of fear. The kind that comes when the impossible becomes a fact. Backup arrived. More officers. They entered the crawl space in pairs, moving carefully, calling out commands into the dark. "Police! Come out now!" Their voices echoed weirdly, swallowed by the structure. No one responded. They searched for nearly 40 minutes. The crawl space connected to multiple points. Behind my closet, behind a bathroom cabinet, in the unit next door, and terrifyingly, to a loose ceiling vent in the hallway outside my door. That hum I'd heard since moving in, air moving through a space that shouldn't have been open. The building had a hidden network, and someone had learned it like a map. But the person wasn't there. When the officers finally emerged, their faces were tight. One of them carried a small bag of items they'd collected. The spare key, the charger, a few wrappers, a notebook with scribbled words in uneven handwriting. They asked if anything else in my apartment seemed missing. I tried to think, but my mind was a storm. I mentioned the peanut butter, the damp sponge, the foggy mirror. The officer nodded slowly, as if confirming what he already knew. They told me to stay somewhere else for the night. They told me the building manager needed to seal the access points immediately. They told me they would file a report, canvass the neighbors, check for similar complaints. They said it like a script, but their eyes kept flicking to my closet as if they didn't trust it to stay closed. I left that day with a trash bag of clothes and my laptop. I slept at a friend's place, but sleep was shallow, haunted by the memory of breathing near my camera. Every time the heating vent clicked on, my body reacted like it was under attack. I didn't tell my friend the full story at first. I said there was an issue with my apartment. I didn't want to see the look people give you when they think you're exaggerating. When I finally told them, their face went pale in a way that made me realize how serious it sounded to someone who hadn't lived it. The building manager called that evening, suddenly urgent in a way he hadn't been when I'd left messages. He apologized too much. He said the building was old, things were complicated, there were maintenance spaces. He promised everything would be sealed. He promised extra locks. He promised to take this seriously. His voice trembled around the edges like he was scared too, or scared of liability, which in some buildings is the same thing. The next day, I returned with the police escort to retrieve more of my belongings. Walking back into my apartment felt like entering a crime scene, even though nothing looked different. The closet patch had been taped over temporarily, a crude barrier that made the opening look like a wound someone was trying to hide. Officers stood in my bedroom while I stuffed clothes into boxes, their presence both comforting and horrifying. Comforting because I wasn't alone. horrifying because I needed them there to feel safe in my own space. As I packed, I noticed small things I hadn't before. A faint smear on the kitchen counter, like an oily handprint. Tiny scratches along the edge of the bathroom doorframe, as if something had brushed it repeatedly in the dark. On the top shelf of the pantry, a packet of crackers open, crumbs scattered in a pattern that looked like it had been eaten slowly, carefully, over time. Then I remembered something that made my stomach turn so hard I had to sit down. My toothbrush. I went to the bathroom sink and stared at it. It sat in the holder like always, bristles slightly splayed. My mind played a cruel game. How many times had I used it after someone else had touched it? How many nights had someone stood inches away from me in that bathroom, listening to me breathe? I threw it away immediately. My hands shook so badly that the officer asked if I was okay. I said yes, because what else do you say when the truth sounds like a nightmare? The officers asked to check my camera setup again to see if any more footage existed. I pulled up the recordings from the previous weeks. We watched them together in my living room, 3 adults staring at a screen that had become a witness. Most nights were empty, but once you know what to look for, you see more than you want. There were nights when the exposure shifted at 3:17 a.m. Exactly, as if someone passed close by. There were 2 nights when a shadow crossed the kitchen floor, low and quick. There was one night when the audio picked up a whispering sound, so faint it could have been air through a vent, except it had rhythm, like murmured words. And then there was a clip from a week earlier, one I'd never noticed, because it looked like nothing at first glance. At 2:58 a.m., the living room was still. Then, in the reflection of the dark TV screen, a movement. A shape rising behind the couch, slow and deliberate, as if someone had been crouched there the entire time. The camera didn't capture their face, but the reflection did, for a split second. Pale skin, hollow eyes, and a mouth slightly open, like they were tasting the air. I felt something primal flood my body. Revulsion, terror, anger. The officer paused the clip and leaned closer. He didn't say anything for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "That's a person," he said. The building manager sealed the access points over the next 2 days. They replaced drywall, installed metal plates, locked down vents. They acted like they were repairing property damage, but I knew they were trying to repair a reality that had been punctured. A building isn't just walls and pipes, it's trust. And mine was gone. I moved out within a week. But the story didn't end there, because once you've been watched without knowing, you start to question every gap in your life. You start to replay days and wonder, was that sound in the night a rat or a human being holding their breath? Was that smell mildew or someone's unwashed clothes pressed against damp brick? Was that missing food an accident or a routine? The police later told me the term for it. Frogging. People living secretly inside someone else's home. It sounded like a joke word, like something from the internet. And yet it explained too much. The officers said it happened more often than people realize, especially in older buildings with crawl spaces, attics, basements, hidden maintenance corridors. The person usually slipped in when the resident was gone, using keys, loose vents, unlocked windows, or building design flaws. They said sometimes the person had nowhere else to go. Sometimes they did it for the thrill. Sometimes they had mental health issues. Sometimes they were running from something. All of those explanations sounded like ways to put a label on a thing that didn't deserve one. Because none of them answered the question that kept me awake. Why my apartment? Why me? A few days after I moved out, the building manager called again. Voice tight. They'd found something else in the crawl space after sealing it. Something that hadn't been noticed during the first search. It was wedged behind a beam deeper in the corridor, hidden under insulation. A small digital alarm clock. Its display was cracked, but the buttons worked. The manager said it was set to one time only. 3:17. He asked if it meant anything to me. My throat went dry. It meant everything. The police used the items to build a timeline. They dusted for prints, but in a space like that, nothing was clean. They canvassed the building. The guy across the hall admitted he'd heard noises too, but he thought it was just the building. The woman downstairs mentioned that once, months ago, she saw someone on the fire escape above her smoking. But when she called up, no one answered. Another tenant said they'd found their bathroom cabinet open one morning and assumed they'd forgotten to close it. Someone else said their cat hissed at the closet sometimes, staring at the wall like it saw something moving behind it. The building had been whispering for a long time. We just didn't know how to listen. 2 weeks after my move, the police called with an update. They hadn't caught the person, but they had a lead. A man seen leaving the building early one morning, caught on a street camera, carrying a backpack and moving fast, head down. They tracked him to a nearby area with shelters and abandoned buildings. They said they were still investigating. I should have felt relief that the person was gone. Instead, I felt a constant, low-grade dread that he wasn't, that he had simply relocated, that he had learned new walls, new vents, new hiding places. The thought that a human being could disappear inside architecture and survive off your routines was a kind of horror that didn't fade with distance. For months, every new place I lived felt temporary. I checked closets like they were traps. I put cameras in every room. I slept with lights on. I listened to walls like they were radios tuned to a channel only I could hear. Friends laughed gently, told me I was being paranoid, said I'd been through something weird and it would pass. I smiled and agreed because I wanted it to be true. But paranoia isn't always irrational. Sometimes it's experience. One night, about 3 months later, I woke up at exactly 3:17 a.m. The room was dark. My heart was hammering. For a second, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the new apartment. New building, newer walls, no crawl space, no old brick corridors. I breathed out slowly, telling my body to calm down. Then I heard it. A faint scrape. Not loud, not obvious. A soft, careful sound from somewhere near the closet. My breath caught. I lay still, listening. The scrape stopped. I waited for the building to settle, for a pipe to click, for anything that would prove it was normal. Nothing. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and swept the beam across the room. The closet door was closed. The walls were intact. The vent above the door was screwed tightly into place. Everything was normal. I sat up anyway. I walked to the closet and placed my hand on the door. It was cold, solid. I pulled it open. Inside was nothing but clothes and boxes and empty space. No seam, no patch, no hidden corridor. And yet the smell, faint, sour, like damp plaster, hovered for a moment, then vanished as if it had never been there. I shut the closet slowly and backed away, my mind screaming at itself. You're safe. You moved. It's over. It can't be happening again. But the body remembers what the mind wants to forget. The body remembers being watched. It remembers the sound of breathing too close to a camera. It remembers how a building can hide a person the way the ocean hides a storm. The next morning, I checked every lock twice. I reviewed my camera footage, heart in my throat, expecting to see a crouched shadow, a pale face reflected in glass. The footage showed nothing. Empty rooms, still air. Just me walking into frame at 7:12 a.m. looking like someone who hadn't slept. I wanted to believe it was only trauma, that my brain had taken a real horror and decided to replay it in new settings, that my senses were unreliable now, that every smell and scrape was just my nervous system stuck in survival mode. And maybe that's true. But there's one last detail I can't erase because it isn't emotion. It's evidence. When I moved out of the original apartment, I took my camera with me. I packed it in a box with other electronics. I didn't plug it in again until weeks later, when I finally unpacked and tried to reclaim normal life. When I turned it on, it connected to my phone automatically and asked if I wanted to review saved clips. I almost deleted everything, desperate to stop seeing those timestamps. Instead, I scrolled one last time, morbid curiosity pulling me like gravity. There was a clip saved from the morning I left the apartment the first time, when the police told me to go outside and wait. I hadn't watched it because I'd been too shaken. The clip began with me leaving in a rush, keys in hand, eyes wide, breathing fast. I shut the door behind me. The living room went still. The camera kept recording. Minutes passed. The apartment was empty, silent. Then, at 8:27 a.m., the exposure shifted. A shadow crossed the frame, low and slow, as if someone was crawling. The shadow moved toward the front door and stopped just out of view. The audio picked up a sound, soft, almost playful. A single knock from inside the door, then another sound, faint and close, like lips brushing the air. A whisper. Not a word I could understand. Just breath, shaped into something that sounded like it had been said many times before. And then, very calmly, whoever it was moved back toward the kitchen, out of frame, into the unseen space where my camera couldn't reach. The timestamp in the corner read 8:27. But the real horror wasn't the time. It was the certainty that while I stood outside waiting for police, believing I'd escaped, someone was still inside my home. Listening, watching, not running, not panicking, just waiting for the walls to open again. That's the part people don't understand when I tell them the story now. They want a clean ending. The person gets caught, the access points get sealed, the victim moves on. They want the fear to have a boundary. But fear like this doesn't have one. It seeps. It lives in the gaps. It teaches you that home is a fragile illusion made of locks and assumptions. It teaches you that a building can hold secrets bigger than your life, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't outside your door. It's already inside, pressed against the drywall, perfectly still, learning your schedule, breathing in sync with you so you don't notice the extra breath in the room. I didn't know someone was living in my walls. Now I check every wall like it might be listening back, and every time the clock hits 3:17 a.m., I wake up before the sound even happens, because some part of me is still in that old bedroom, staring at the closet, waiting to hear the scrape, That means the hidden space has woken up again.